You have a culinary background, and I know that you were a chef for 16 years before becoming an engineer and then now founding ManageUp. And I just wonder how the different experiences you've had along the way kind of lead to this view you have that we have to put people back into leadership. Where did that come from?
That's foundational in the kitchen. And I always give praise to my time in the culinary field because when you're in a kitchen, you depend on each other and everyone has their area of specialty. First, it would be remiss for me not to acknowledge the fact that Black women right now are being laid off and removed from organizations at records that have been unseen. Their unemployment rate is over 6%, and this is in the United States, and it's just jaw-dropping.
What's really going on that leads us to these places that we really don't want to be?
First, we have to talk about how people are becoming managers. There is a big narrative within the manager space where folks who do phenomenal at their job kind of promote into management. And these are folks that probably didn't have that in their career trajectory.
My very special guest has worked at Brex and Credit Karma and served as the founder of Counterpoint. She is a distinguished voice in the tech industry, wielding a diverse background in engineering, executive HR roles, as well as having a background in culinary art. Her journey encapsulates leadership at the intersection of technology and humanity. And today she is the CEO and founder of ManageUp. She is Ash Hynie. Welcome to the show, Ash.
Thank you for having me so much. I'm so excited.
I'm excited too. I really loved an initial conversation we had. I think it was our good friend Adam Weber who introduced us. So he's been a guest on the show before. And it's my honor to have you on with me today.
Yeah, it's super exciting.
Well, one of the things that I kind of mentioned briefly in your intro is that you have a culinary background, and I know that you were a chef for 16 years before becoming an engineer, very different, and then now founding ManageUp. So you've got this amazing career transformation and arc to your story. And I just wonder how the different experiences you've had along the way kind of lead to this view you have that we have to put people back into leadership. Where did that come from?
Yeah, honestly, that's foundational in the kitchen. And I always give praise to my time in the culinary field because when you're in a kitchen, the reality is you depend on each other and everyone has their area of specialty. You're not trying to reach over into other people's areas. They're responsible for executing. And as I've gone through my career, it's about empowering folks to be those specialists in their areas and really depending on them to show up in the way that they promise to show up. And I think that we do folks a discredit when we don't see their skills and their value. And so this has honestly been the foundation of everything that I've done, from creating programs internally at companies, but more importantly, as we got over to this area of founding ManageUp.
It's amazing. I never really thought about it that way, but we can get so busy just with the day-to-day. I'm sure it's true in the kitchen. It seems like from the shows that I watch, a pretty high pressure cooked environment. But when we kind of overlook people, even though they're right there with us, it's an interesting tendency that can happen.
Absolutely. Happens all the time. And I don't think that it's something that's intentional. I just feel like people get really used to depending on themselves. We are in a very individualistic society. And so understanding that we can execute on our own, PowerPoints for us, and teamwork makes the dream work, right? I think everyone has heard that term before.
It's so true. And I think that as the pressure builds, or, life can be challenging sometimes. We get thrown a curveball or something. It kind of tends to turn up the volume on those me issues and takes us away from really seeing the strengths of others. One of the things you mentioned to me, and kind of building on this point of most people aren't really seen for who they are, you mentioned that marginalized groups in particular have been kind of hit the most, first, hardest. Like it's really challenging by these systemic forces that are really swirling all about us. But I wonder if you might tell us just a little bit, Ash, like what does that actually look like in today's workforce and workplaces? And what was it that made you realize that we've got to take a different approach that kind of led you to create ManageUp?
Yeah, well, first, it would be remiss for me not to acknowledge the fact that Black women right now are being laid off and removed from organizations at records that have been unseen. Their unemployment rate is over 6%, and this is in the United States. And it's just jaw-dropping to think that some of the best, and I'm biased here, some of the best talent that you have is being removed from the organization. But when you think about historically excluded folks across the board and marginalized folks, we see two things happening. One, with 2020 and all the efforts to be more inclusive and diverse in our hiring practices, Right now, what we're recognizing is that this is like the kitchen, first in, first out. And so or last in, first out. And so what we're seeing is the folks that were hired during this time, because they don't have extensive experience or they haven't been in organizations long, as these layoffs are happening, it's easy to drop that talent that doesn't have as much tenure. And that usually includes those whom were, again, pulled in from that huge rush of inclusion that was going on. And then secondly, biases come into the picture often here. And this goes into areas of affinity. When you think about how organizations are situated, you have a lot of folks who are white, Asian, especially in tech, who are in leadership. And when you start to get to the more newer roles, or so the more junior roles, you start to see more of the historically excluded folks there. And these are folks who don't have as much presence in leadership. And so those decision making opportunities are not there, or don't have those folks in the room. And then affinity takes place when you're thinking about rolling people out of the company is, I don't know these people. I haven't worked with them very much. I'm not familiar with them. This leads to things like distrust, or not necessarily leaning on them in times of pressure or need because just unfamiliarity. And so we see a number of different areas where this system starts to take place, and people in this demographic just get dropped the fastest.
It is devastating, obviously, on a personal level for people who are affected. It's devastating in terms of the homogeneity that results, really is the enemy of innovation and creativity and all the type of teaming that we really need, the collaboration, I find. And over the course of my career, I remember one of the earliest lessons I got that I really appreciated was that not everybody's like me. You know, we're all different. We have different needs. And when I started recognizing that a little bit, eventually that gave way to recognizing that not everyone's having the same work experience that I am either. And that, you know, I later on had the benefit of being trained in the different type of biases that you'll never eliminate, but you have to be mindful of when you're making decisions, or, you know, that type of affinity bias that you mentioned. It's so real. So I'm so grateful that you're calling out and recognizing the fact. And I had not heard that before about last in, first out, but it makes total sense that as we became more inclusive, it was a pretty tenuous hold that some of these people had when we started looking at jobs. And as soon as things started to tighten up, you know, the first ones at risk.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, I think that if we think about all managers, you know, one of the things that you had mentioned to me in an earlier conversation of ours was that you had said that managers mean well, but and they mean well and they want well, but they need support. That's what it was. And I'm just like, that is so true. I find that, you know, very few people, managers, you know, they have good intentions, but ultimately we don't always know what to do about it. And so my question is, when you think about these well-intentioned managers, how is it that we end up producing these biased or unfair outcomes? Like, what's really going on that leads us to these places that we really don't want to be?
First, we have to talk about how people are becoming managers. I think that there is a big narrative within the manager space where folks who do phenomenal at their job kind of promote into management. And these are folks that probably didn't have that in their career trajectory. And so they find themselves in a place where they're amazing executors at a high level, they're leading, they're mentoring, and they're doing phenomenal things. And now they're responsible for growing other talent in ways that take them away from the thing that they do best, and that's their job. And how do you tell somebody who is phenomenal at executing and really enjoys the work that they do, I'm going to need you to stop doing that so much, and I want you to focus on these other people and grow them so that the business does X, Y, and Z with these folks. And that doesn't always suit well for those individuals, and therefore there's a little bit of a dissonance in them being managers because they're always in competition with what they want to do versus what the organization needs them to do. And that's not all cases, but it definitely does happen. Additionally, there are some people who really do want to become managers. And I think this is when you start to look into the organization structure of how they're supporting that management layer. And I've worked on manager cohorts and in employee experience. And the reality is that learning and development, depending on how it's situated, can really support managers. But what you usually see is that there's going to be a budget of $3,000 to $10,000 per manager to be able to gain the management skills that they need. And so they might send them to a conference, or they might send them to a course and have them do all these exercises and feel really great, get these certifications. But then how does that actually translate into their day-to-day work when they're in the company? And then they're also up against all the responsibilities that they have within that company. because these skills are newer, they're a lot more difficult to find place to execute in the scope of all the work that they're up to. And there's one last thing. So the third point that I'll talk about is managers are so super saturated with tasks these days. Not only are they still responsible for doing the work that is within their career, within their role definition, um, and that's on the engineering side. I'll use that as an example. So you have these engineering managers that are responsible for still pushing code, still strategizing, still pushing, but then they have all of the responsibilities of growing their talent as well. And that creates a huge issue with time management. And how do you find the most equitable, responsible decision making when you are overly stressed about all the things that you are now responsible for as a manager, leading who knows how many people, and then are responsible for contributing to the goals of the company or getting your own work done. So it's again, it's a multifaceted problem that you have to see it on all sides and be really realistic about how managers are existing in these companies in order to start thinking about how we're solving the problems for them.
I think you're touching on so many different layers that we just don't often think about. And it's true within a bank or construction firm or anywhere, but let's stick with engineering for a second. We take somebody who's either has a lot of tenure or maybe they're a really good coder. They're spending their time and we're like, hey, I got a perfect idea. Let's make this person a manager without ever asking, do you want to manage people and everything that comes along with it? And then all of a sudden, when it's like, okay, now we've made you a manager, and they're like, well, I guess I probably should because I look on LinkedIn and all my compadres are all getting promoted, and if I want to make more money, I guess I have to manage people. And you're like, oh geez, so what are we doing to give them some scaffolding, some training? In most companies, not much. And then, like you said, if we do give training, it's like, okay, let's go off and go into this classroom environment, this artificial setting. And then immediately afterward, you got to go right back to work. And you're like, now it's up to me to figure out how do these things connect? And you're like, oh my gosh. So that it's like, it's so many missteps along the way. And I think it's just kind of the default mode that we're in when it comes time to, teaching people how to lead others, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's unbelievable. And I think that, you mentioned also how much pressure and time demands there are. And I think one of the things I see that we've talked about a little bit on the show is the rise of AI and the potential to, look at AI as a productivity tool. It can kind of automate some of the admin tasks. And I know for engineers in particular, there's ways to use AI to help to either take over some of the burden of some of the code. And there's a lot of absorption happening. But I know that ManageUp uses AI in a very specific way. And I was very interested when you were describing to me initially when it came time to convert this kind of conversational data that's taking place. We're awash in conversations, and whether it's transcripts or video or meeting notes, there's all kinds of stuff, but you're turning it into quantitative insights. And really, it's all about this notion of performance management. Performance management is much maligned, and probably with good reason in the way we traditionally approach it. But I think it sounds counterintuitive in a sense that you're using technology to make us more human, which is fascinating to me. So, how does that work? How do we kind of how are you using this technology approach to be able to, what I say, rehumanize sort of our relationships and our organizations?
Yeah, there was actually a phenomenal article on LinkedIn yesterday. I wrote about it because I felt inclined to bring this human aspect back into the conversation of AI, especially in regards to people management, HR, etc. And it's that humans are a part of the process. Humans are the art. And when you think about AI is any other tool. And so if you're thinking about the replacement of people with AI, then you're just thinking about how do we technologicalize people? That's not what we're up to here. What we are up to is how do we reinforce or support the jobs that need to get done for those people so that they can work more efficiently and effective at their jobs? How do we take some of that pressure that we already know exists within their day-to-day role and turn that into an opportunity for them to be well equipped with their tasks at hand? And so an example that I'll use is performance reviews themselves. When you think about performance reviews, a lot of folks roll their eyes or they get really upset because all of the work that comes along with doing that. And the reality is it's a lot, and organizations have a lot of information that they want to consume when we're thinking about reviews themselves. your company already has more data than it probably knows what to do with. And when you talk about conversational data, what we've done is we've gone into the places that managers already look at to see how is my team performing. And so let's use Slack as an example, or Teams. When you're going back and you're thinking about how was Tanya doing working with this project, and what were some of her teammates thinking about or talking to her about in the Slack channel where the project is, you are able to get a snapshot of how Tanya's work is reverberating between the results of the project as well as the competencies that she personally has for her role. And so with AI, what we can do is we can do that faster and smarter. We can just pull that data and we can pull it forward for the manager and say, here are the kudos that Tanya is getting. Here's where she's shining. Here's where she has opportunities. And this is all just from Slack. Now, think about that power over all of the conversational data that's within the company. So think about email, or think about docs, or think about where the company stores a lot of its information. There's other tools like Glean that where you can do a quick search within the company to understand like what's the ladder for this particular role, and how does this person stack up against that. What we can do is we can pull all of that together and say, well, here's exactly how that's happening based off of the values and the competencies of the company. And this is all from the information that's public that we have available to us, so that managers can be a lot more supported in seeing the scope of the work that their employees are up to.
It's amazing. I'm loving this conversation because I think that two things immediately happen when a manager gets the email from HR. It says, "Okay, it's time for a performance review for this person." And immediately the reaction is never, "Oh, good, I'm so glad." But if you pull them aside in a quieter moment, they say, "Oh, I absolutely want to give the feedback. I want to help them improve. I want to know, how this aligns with their personal goals, et cetera." But I think that the challenge is it's like the sets in like, okay, great. Now I have to go do a bunch of work, and how am I going to find time to do this in the midst of everything else? So time savings is one of the big problems. The other is recency bias. Being able to say like, if it's an annual or even a semi-annual review, I, I got to think back to what they were working on 6 months ago. That's like really hard. Now, am I scanning Slack? Am I going to go back to my email and say, well, what was happening in January? If this is a mid-year review, you're like, oh my gosh. So you get so much recency bias in there too. It seems that technology can really help us because it processes all of that. It can take a look at a year's worth of Slack channel conversation in like 2 seconds, and we're just like, man, that's all this. Oh yeah, it kind of comes up to you. It's things that you would miss otherwise. So I really see the benefits of allowing the tech to just take a look at what's already there. To your
Yep.
point, it's like this exists.
Yeah. And too often the individuals themselves have forgotten about that work. Think about right after the performance review, when some of the big goals of the companies are released and you get on that initial product and you start releasing it and you're excited and great stuff is happening. And then 6 months from then, you're getting these reviews about, oh, well, we're moving on to something else and we're not seeing the performance. That 100%, the recency bias is 100% there. And unfortunately, that is what ends up happening when you don't have the time or the space to be able to do that research. And so again, we're thinking about how do we see the entire scope of an employee's work as it slacks up against the competencies and the values of the company.
Ash, I can't remember what I did last month. Like, you're right. For myself, it's like, and when you do a self review, which is often part of a 360, you have to do the same thing. You're like, oh my gosh, I got to go look back at my calendar, I guess, or it's a disaster. And so I think, but there's really two interesting angles that I'm finding from this part of the conversation, talking about how can technology help us rehumanize. One is to help us overcome some of our human tendencies of recency or can only process limited information or something like that. The second side is going to be around how do we rehumanize the human connection part. So now when you have all of this output and you have a more comprehensive, I would say, a more appropriate view of the employee's performance, you can also get over some of the challenge. Like in my interaction with Sally, Sally seems really quiet. She just doesn't seem to be very assertive. And you're like, well, the technology actually says she's crushing it when it comes to her project management, her docs, the feedback that we're seeing in Slack channel. People are celebrating Sally for keeping the train on the tracks. And all of a sudden, like, geez, my view of Sally may not have been 100% accurate, or at least might have been one-sided. Is that something you're seeing also from ManageUp's perspective?
Absolutely. One of the number one bits of feedback that folks get when they are thinking about their performance review or even promotion is that they don't have, quote, enough visibility. And that is something that's used from leadership all the time. If you are not one of the squeakiest wheels, you're not getting the oil. And that is difficult for folks who aren't used to or have not been in a position where they're good about speaking about their accomplishments. And then when you think about that cross culturally, there are some cultures where folks don't talk about their wins because it is more respectful not to. They feel like when people see them for the work that they're doing, then they automatically get the accolades. And unfortunately, with the noise of organizations and with the speed at which we're moving, too often those cultures specifically, but also those people that fall into that category are getting left behind in the conversation of who's actually making an impact in the company.
It's so amazing. And it's so true. It happens all the time. I do a lot of work in the area of personality, and we tend to see that people who are highly extroverted, highly assertive tend to rise in organizations. But that's not necessarily a reflection of the actual value they're contributing, the performance over time. It's just the most visible. Sometimes we convince ourselves and we say, oh, well, we need a dynamic, person to take all. Well, maybe, but you might find that the organization really needs to boost its quality outcomes, its efficiency, its predictability, consistency. And those aren't going to be the types of people who are the loudest and shouting about their accomplishments, to your point. So it's like technology almost is helping protect us from overlooking people, as you've been pointing out.
Mhm. A lot of the contributors who are considered the glue in this category usually falls within women and introverted individuals do not get seen for doing all of the work. Those who are working on the tech debt, for example, or those who are working on the design in the back, unless those designs are getting pushed forward on a deck or within the website or whatever product that you're working on, they're not getting seen for that. And so again, we're doing our best at ManageUp to make sure that we are putting those wins forward because people are seeing them in the moment. And so we're bringing them forward in the conversation of performance so that people can see them in the now as well.
You're making so many light bulbs go off for me too, because here I am. I'm one of those kind of loud and I won't say obnoxious, I hope, but those extroverted people. And I'm not super detail oriented, but I'm very sort of dynamic and push things forward. So I don't tend to spend a lot of time in the detailed docs because I don't tend to do detailed work. However, that doesn't mean that sometimes I'm managing people who are asked to do very detailed work and I want to get a clean read on it, but I haven't necessarily been where they are doing what they're really super good at. So now the technology from ManageUp can help surface that and give me a more appropriate view about their contributions because they're taking place in places that I don't always hang out. So, oh wow, what an amazing sort of it's like a sidecar. It's like this complementary thing to what I normally see in live meetings and other types of things that I'm accustomed to, executive sessions, but that doesn't mean that's the sole sum total of their contributions when they're taking place and creating tremendous value somewhere else.
Right. Right. I love that. I appreciate that perspective because it happens all the time in organizations. And these are the things where when you talk about bringing the human back in, recognizing how we perform and function is a part of that as well. And so being a person who can think critically about how am I working? Am I seeing all of the things that I need to see? And realistically recognizing that we just don't have that capacity. But when we talk about how AI implementation can work for us, it's that it can see that. And it also can speak to what is true. If the role definition is this and the values of the company are this, then here's how that person is performing. It's no longer an assessment of your visibility to say that that person is performing according to their role.
Hugely important. It's so true. A lot of times, this is where that affinity bias in a way shows up. We hire somebody to do a job and that job is very different than what we would prefer to do. And that's why we're hiring them to do it because we don't want to do it. So we can say, we need somebody to create these detailed manuals. Okay, great. I don't want to do that. It's not my my superpower. So I'm going to hire somebody to do it. But then when the performance review comes up and it's like, what do you think about this person's communication? And you're like, well, Sally doesn't really speak up in meetings. And you're like, well, okay, but you hired her to create detailed documentation and everybody else on the team is loving it. She's saving them tons of time. Everything's super accurate. Unlike when you were doing it badly, by the way, it's like, okay, great. So it's so easy to lose the fact that we need to evaluate people in the context of what we're asking them to do and how they're creating value from their side, not from our side. And I think it's such a great, powerful reminder. And again, I'm so encouraged that ManageUp has technology that can help complement, overcome some of this. Because again, we'll go back to well-intentioned managers. They don't set out to be a jerk and look at people in the wrong light, but it happens. It absolutely happens. And we'd be foolish to pretend that it doesn't, or like we're above this, or we're always perfect as managers. Certainly not the case. One of the things that you had mentioned to me too, you use this phrase that I love so much, which is putting the spinach in the lasagna, which is all about how do we take these healthy practices and put it into what people already like. And I think that I'm hearing some of this, but I don't know if you maybe have an example that might really highlight this and showcase this for us, whether it's inclusion and fairness or something that's in a way that feels natural. I think so many times we feel like this is an artificial thing to do, or we have to go to some workshop to kind of learn how to do it. How in it, have you in your approach, have you seen ways of putting the spinach in the lasagna?
Yeah, I mean, and this is more just about how do you put the health back into the process, as well as how are we helping people to be the best that they can be without too much scrutiny on their part or feeling like they're swallowing a huge pill doing that. And the reality is 85% of HR's time is spent giving feedback to managers on how to give feedback, which is incredible. That is a huge time spend for some of our most valued individuals within the company. And managers need that much support. And so, an example of what we've done with ManageUp is make sure that folks are always supported with real time data so that they can give feedback in the way that's most essential for that individual in a very unbiased way. It's very practical, it's very effective, and it's very actionable. And so, when you think about feedback training at companies, it's usually how do I give feedback? And so we've broken down the feedback model that the organization uses. So it can be coin, it can be smart, whichever model that they use. And then we help them to parse the data that they have to say, this would be a good approach to talk about context when you think about the coin model. And here are the examples that you should use or focus on. And this can be between a one-on-one that you're having either once or twice a month, or it can be the performance review that you have once every quarter, half, or annually. And we want to make sure that people just feel that support of you always have something to say that is going to align with the goals of the individual as well as with the company. How do we keep people growing and how do we keep people moving in the direction that the company is going without having to consistently bring them back into the, oh, well, we're not seeing this or we're not seeing that. Of course, critique is necessary, and we have a way to help platform that feedback so that managers can easily give it. And of course, there's where the human aspect comes back in, is they're always going to be the one to deliver it. And then they have whatever information or ameliorative information from the data we've collected to be able to see why we're making these recommendations or why we're giving these points of feedback that are essential with keeping your employee in line with their competencies and the values of the company.
It's one of the most important things managers can do is to provide feedback. But I think a lot of times we hear that and we're like, oh, I should just tell them how they're doing. Well, hold on, time out. We got to do this within the framework of how we've set expectations, cultural norms, the performance models that the organization has established or whatever it might be. Doing that mapping as a human, that can be very challenging. And to do it with any level of consistency across 12 different managers in 12 different functions, even harder still. Yet another example where technology like yours can do some of that heavy lifting for us and do that type of mapping. And all of a sudden it's not taking over and we're not abdicating our responsibility as managers, but we're getting support and help from technology. Like that's a smart thing to do. It's a safer thing to do. It's a more constructive thing to do. I'm hearing. I'm super excited about what you're building.
Yeah. And it's staying objective and it's staying to the point. And I think that that's what unfortunately happens and where bias seeps in the most is feelings get involved, observations get involved, and we don't want to take gut feelings or observations out of the mix. Again, this is why the human aspect is really important. But when you have that really heated interaction or exchange with an employee, and then you go back and you look at what they've been up to and also all of their work that they've been producing, it helps you level out that feeling of upset a little bit more because then you're up against facts instead of just your feelings at that moment. And it challenges you to say, okay, well, that exchange didn't go well. I've seen that we've had a hard time communicating, which we do have a metric of how you've communicated with that individual over time. And so you yourself can start to take a measure of our communication really hasn't been great for the last 6 one-on-ones. I wonder what's happening here. And you can start to dive into that data as well. So we're helping you see a very well-rounded perspective of how you're working with employees, but also how you're leading and guiding them through their performance with the least bias possible.
You're really highlighting something I say quite often, which is as leaders, we must go first. And so a lot of times if I'm finding that communication hasn't gone well, have I really been doing everything I can to communicate or to open the door for a type of communication that would be constructive? Or have I been joining our one-on-one, having just jumped off a Zoom call and I'm not at my best and I'm just going by default and kind of going by my preference, and then all of a sudden it's not landing with them because I'm hitting them with some. Okay, time out. Like let's make sure we're doing everything we can. Now, as a manager, if you have been doing that and it's still not going well, maybe there's something else we need to look at. But I love that the system's kind of teeing up not just let's take a retrospective look at what all has happened. Let's round out your view of this individual's performance within context, and let's showcase those improvement opportunities that we can each take on both sides to kind of make that relationship and that performance as constructive and productive as it can be.
Absolutely.
Very cool. Well, something that's totally not constructive and not productive is a trivia game that I love to play at the end of an interview. And so I've got a segment that I call "Are We Smarter Than AI?" So we're going to use AI's power for good, maybe. I don't know. We'll see. And I mentioned earlier that you had the background of being a chef. So I thought we would get a question about famous chefs. And I'm sure it's going to be totally ridiculous. Here it is. Which of these famous TV chefs is known for his fiery temper and is often associated with the phrase idiot sandwich? I've not heard him say this, but it's a multiple choice. I'll give us three answers. Is it A, Gordon Ramsay, B, Jamie Oliver, or C, Anthony Bourdain? Those are our
I'm
three options.
actually offended that Anthony Bourdain and Jamie Oliver are in that. It is 100% Gordon Ramsay, and we can talk about any of those chefs at any time. I love them, but the answer is Gordon Ramsay.
All right, audience, listeners, if you're playing along at home, you can lock in your answer. We're going with A, Gordon Ramsay, and that is correct. Gordon Ramsay is a famous TV chef known for his fiery temper and his idiot sandwich meme. So there you go. You crushed that one. I love that. I have a much, much better question for you, Ash, which is where can my listeners go to learn more about you and about ManageUp?
Oh, I love it. Find me on LinkedIn. We're all over the place. So manage up. Please follow us, like and follow, as well as join me on the conversations. I'm always talking about performance management there. Would love to have you. But you're going to find me yapping on TikTok, Ash Tech Bestie. That's where you can find me. And then, of course, please find us at manageup.com. We are kicking off the list for new companies that are interested in having this technology rolled into their organization. We would love to work with you. And so get more information from us there.
I love it. Ash, thanks so much for being with us today. Listeners, I'm going to have links for you in the show notes. You can get all the way over to Ash, learn all about ManageUp. Just hit that up and that'll be perfect. Thanks again, Ash, for joining us. I've learned so much and I'm so excited about ManageUp and everything that you're doing.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.